The ethical and legal considerations need to be explored more when we talk about the line between our brain and our property. You're saying that how we think about the role of technology will impact laws and then our future behaviours? Yeah. The brain is an organ of soft nervous tissue contained in the skull, functioning as the coordinating centre of sensations, intellectual and nervous activity. Cognition, on the other hand, is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Our brain is the mushy, organy stuff inside our skull, and cognition is the thinking that happens. Well, when we talk about extending our brain or increasing cognition, it doesn't always mean adding neuron connections, increasing efficiency, or adapting the brain. It could be related to the thoughts, experiences, and senses of the environment that impact cognition. The way we think is impacted by the environment we are in. Yes, the hypothesis of extended cognition takes the idea that your mind is on your smartphone and that human cognition states and processes sometimes spill outside of your head and into objects in our environment. So our thoughts contributing to cognition can be stored in tech. Yeah. Some alleged examples include not just smartphones, laptops and computers, but pencil and paper, our own body, like using fingers when counting, and other people, our friends or spouse who remember our appointments so we don't have to. You're saying my thinking and cognition is extended into my family, friends and devices. That is the hypothesis, and this concept of extension moves away from traditional thinking about the physical basis of human cognition being solely located in the brain and says that this is false. A mixture of brain and environmental states or processes underlie cognition. That could mean that everything is part of cognition. Not quite. Extended cognition has been a topic of conversation since Andy Clark brought it up in 1998, where he proposed part of our knowledge and understanding the world is placed in the environments and contexts we live in. He then furthered his thinking, publishing a book in 2010 about supersizing the mind, which was also followed up by Annie Murphy Paul in 2021. So our knowledge and understanding could be part of the environment. Sort of. Much of this work is theoretical and psychological in nature, impacting how we think about things, which is where Tiago Forte is looking at filling the gaps a little and sharing how to use this extended cognition or brain in the digital world we are now living in. That is related to the Building a Second Brain course about the note-taking. The course is more than note-taking, and extended cognition concerns only the cognitive information processing aspects of the mental life. Hold up, what is information processing? The cognitive psychology approach to memory using the machine-like metaphor for how we perceive information, remember information, process information, and then act on that information. Okay, this hypothesis of extended cognition has, however, inspired similar claims about extensions for other aspects of the mind, including consciousness, conscious experience, emotions, moods, intentional agency, knowledge, and extension of the self. Wait, so the idea of extended cognition actually goes beyond cognition and thinking? Yes, but they are all different from extended cognition. It is only when a smartphone, or a neuron, stands in the right relationship to the rest of our brain that it becomes part of our cognitive life and labelled with mental or cognitive properties. So, if a neuron or device is not being used in thinking, then it doesn't have cognitive properties. And if that's true, then it's not part of cognition and therefore extended cognition. Yes. There are three common arguments for extended cognition, with of course some considerable resistance. Well, yeah, if my phone is part of my cognition, then stealing my phone is like stealing my brain. Yeah, the ethical and legal implications. For those that believe extended cognition, functionalism is one argument for it, which is a philosophical theory that says that the functional role of a physical state or process determines whether the state or process is mental or cognitive. What? The functionalist arguments rely on similarities in functional structure between extended processes and actual or possible internal cognitive processes. Cognition extends because the physical mechanisms that support it work the same way in both cases. So the function of the brain works like the function of the device. Basically, the inference to the best experience argument canvass the benefits that extended cognition would bring to psychology. They argue we should believe that the cognition extends because it would make our psychological theories more unified, elegant, and fruitful. Sounds like a convenience argument to me. Yeah, maybe. The second wave argument emphasised the ways in which our brains integrate with our environment. Cognition extends because brains, bodies, and environments are so tightly intertwined that when we solve certain cognitive tasks, they count as a single system. Wait, that's the systems theory you were talking about when you spoke about the Zettelkasten note-taking method, wasn't it? Yeah, the environment and system relationship in this case is cognition. On the other side, cognitive bloat is a term used to describe high levels of extension. Fans of extended cognition say that human cognition extends in certain cases and to a certain degree, but they usually want to avoid claiming too much cognitive extension. Too much cognitive extension might make our existing mental concepts pointless, absurd, or otherwise unfit for purpose. We might end up saying you believe everything on the internet, or that you and I believe the same things just because we happen to live in the same environment. Avoiding cognitive bloat requires drawing some principled line between those relationships with the environment that entail cognitive extension and those that don't. Ah, right. So not everything can be classed as extended cognition. Yes. An argument for the hypothesis of extended cognition needs to guard against an absurdity of the view, introducing restrictions to avoid cognitive bloat. However, that may cut against the assumptions required to motivate any form of extended cognition at all. For example, they may violate the parity principle. So, don't take it too far, but adding restrictions can make it hard to believe. But what is this parity principle you're talking about? If we complete a task that would be traditionally seen as something done in our head, we would have no hesitation in recognizing it as part of the cognitive process. Then, anything that does that process is part of the cognitive process as well. So, something doing the job of our brain can be classed as part of cognition because it's doing the same thing. Yes, the hypothesis of embedded cognition is an alternative to extended cognition that claims to offer all of the latter explanation benefits, but without the cost of saying that notebooks have mental cognitive properties. The differences? They differ in that extended cognition says that extended cognitive processes are 100% mental or cognitive, whereas embedded cognition says that only the internal, brain-based parts of these processes are mental or cognitive. They sound pretty similar to me. Yes, but the difference impact legal considerations. The third argument against extended cognition is the coupling fallacy. Arguments for extended cognition often describe a two-way causal coupling between our brains and the environment. We could say that cognition extends because of this coupling relationship. However, just because X and Y are causally coupled does not mean that X is part of Y. Your brain and the environment may be causally coupled, but that does not mean that your brain processes extend into the environment. This objection appears to mostly directly threaten second-wave arguments for extended cognition, since those arguments emphasize two-way causal coupling between the brain, body, and environment. So this argument isn't just against extended cognition, it's also against systems theory. Yes, but doesn't that mean there's no answer because systems theory is just a philosophy of thought? Yes. Yes, it does. Now you see the issue. We all think about it in different ways, which is seen in the next argument against extended cognition, which is a mark of the cognitive. What a mark of the cognitive is a set of necessary or sufficient conditions for a physical state or process to be cognitive. It is often sought as a way of overcoming disagreements between philosophers about extended cognition. If we could agree on a mark of the cognitive, we could use it to decide whether disputed cases, like Otto's notebook, really are cases for extended cognition.
Hold up, where did Otto's notebook come from?
That is the thought experiment from the original paper by Andy and David. It is not a real-life example, just a possible representation of extended cognition.
Let's hear it.
Inga has normal human memory. One day she hears of an interesting exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. Inga thinks, recites that the museum is on 3rd Street and sets off. Otto suffers from a mild form of Alzheimer's disease, and he always writes down useful information in his notebook. On the same day, Otto also hears of the exhibition at the museum, retrieves the address from his notebook, and sets off.
Right.
Andy and David say that Otto has a belief that the museum is on 3rd Street. This belief, and Otto's cognitive processes associated with storing and recalling it, extend outside of Otto's brain and into his notebook.
Extended cognition, kind of like extended memory.
Yeah, memory comes from the information processing approach I mentioned earlier. The functionalism argument about beliefs says that what makes a brain state a belief is that it functions in a way appropriate to a belief. Andy and David observe that Otto's notebook functions for him in roughly the same way as Inga's biological memory functions for her.
I see.
Exposure to new information causes Otto to modify the state of his notebook. Exposure to new information causes Inga to modify the state of her biological memory. Otto's notebook causes him to stop at 3rd Street. Inga's biological memory causes her to stop at 3rd Street.
I see the similarities.
Yeah, they concluded that just as Inga has a belief that the museum is on 3rd Street, Otto has a belief, partly realised in his notebook, that the museum is on 3rd Street. This argument relies on accepting functionalism about beliefs and also the parity principle I mentioned earlier. If we complete a task that would be traditionally seen as something done in our head, we would have no hesitation in recognizing it as part of a cognitive process. Then anything that does that process is part of the cognitive process as well.
The notebook.
If it is possible for an intelligent being to have a fully cognitive internal memory system, like Otto's notebook, and we accept the parity principle and functionalism, then we should say that Otto's actual notebook counts as a case of extended cognition.
What about the arguments against extended cognition, though? What do they say?
Embedded cognition obviously see only internal brain-based parts of the process as cognitive, so the book is not extended cognition. The coupling fallacy again says just because the book caused him to go to the museum doesn't mean it is part of cognition. Then back to the mark of the cognitive, various marks have been proposed, including, first, a cognitive process must involve non-derived representational content and be functionally similar to actual cases of internal brain-based human cognition. Second, a cognitive process must be part of an integrated, persistent system, and it must causally contribute to a wide range of cognitive phenomena. Or third, a process is cognitive if it belongs to a subject in the sense of contributing to the intentional content of the subject's personal level states.
So there are different ways to look at a mark of the cognitive.
Yes, and depending on which one you lean towards will change if you think the notebook is part of extended cognition.
How so?
Well, critics of extended cognition tend to favour conservative marks of the cognitive, like the first or second suggestions, which rule out many cases of extended cognition. advocates of extended cognition tend to favour liberal marks of the cognitive, like the third option, which allow in many cases of extended cognition.
So we kind of just need to, make up our minds, and that's how we think about it.
Well, there is currently no consensus about which is the correct mark of the cognitive, but there seems to be no single set of necessary or sufficient conditions that determines which physical processes are healthy, living, or cancerous. So there might be no set of necessary or sufficient conditions that determines which physical processes are cognitive or mental.
In other words, there's unlikely to be a right answer.
In the way you think, yes, but when we apply this to legal situations, there needs to be some clarity.
Go on.
If the extended cognition stores, like the notebook, phones, etc., are taken, damaged, or viewed without permission, should there be legal action, and does damage mean extended assault?
Can I say it depends?
For a device to be part of extended cognition, depending on the marks of the cognitive, it needs to be part of the world it is integrated with. This does suggest our mental faculties can be partly constituted by external artifacts whenever these external artifacts are appropriately integrated into our overall cognitive system.
So Otto having the notebook functioning as his memory.
Yeah. When we look at assault, personal assault is a particular form of harm which involves the actual or intended use of force to another person without their consent.
Right.
The ethical significance is freedom from a violation of bodily integrity at the heart of one's right to self-ownership and personal autonomy. The legal significance is assault has long been designated as a special category of offence, one whose status in criminal and civil law is distinct from the offence one commits by purely damaging another's property.
So self-ownership and personal autonomy can be impacted, and damage to property and damage to a person are different in the eyes of the law.
Right. Considerations of what intent means is open for discussion, but the person elements are taken for granted as the physical biological being. A line has been drawn between person and property. The body of the victim includes all parts of their body, including his organs, his nervous system, and his brain. Bodily injury, therefore, may include injury of any of those parts of the body responsible for his mental and other faculties.
So bodily abuse is covered, but because mental faculties are included, you could also bring in, the extended cognition.
Exactly. A reductive approach would say that they would be inclined to only consider parts of the body. However, functionalist thinking about faculties leaves it open about whether it's only biological parts, which are responsible for our faculties blurring the line between person and property.
So if we take a functionalist thinking, extended cognition approach, part of what is classed as property could actually be part of the person and then treated differently.
Maybe. Self-ownership is that each person has powers and full, exclusive rights of control and use, and therefore owes no service or product to anyone else that he has not contracted to supply.
So to have self-ownership is to basically have permission over who has our stuff or who can see our stuff.
Basically, and personal autonomy is that in any number of ways we are constituted by factors that lie beyond our reflective control, but which nonetheless structure our values, thoughts, and motivations.
So we can be who we want to be and live how we want to live.
So, the logic behind extended assault. Intentional harm to a part of a person which is responsible for their mental and other faculties constitutes personal assault. Our mental faculties can be partly constituted by external artifacts, whenever these external artifacts are appropriately integrated into our overall cognitive system. Therefore, having our integrated epistemic artifacts intentionally compromised plausibly suffices as a case of personal assault.
I mean, I see the logic, but I'm not sure or not really convinced how that would hold up in court.
There was a landmark court case where this philosophy of thought was used, and another legal case that could impact laws and ethics in the future.
Let's hear it.
David Riley, a US citizen of California, was stopped for a routine traffic violation, but was charged with weapon charges after a police officer searched Riley, having seized the cell phone and found incriminating evidence on it. Riley had moved to suppress all evidence that the police had obtained from his cell phone. However, the trial court denied the motion and Riley was convicted. The California Court of Appeal affirmed the lower court's ruling, confirming the previous decision.
So he went to prison for information found on his phone, but the police didn't have permission to look at the information on his phone.
Yes. Interestingly, however, the US Supreme Court in June 2014 unanimously overturned the conviction upheld by the California Court of Appeals. Riley's original conviction was based on a legal precedent called Search Incident to Arrest, CITA.
And that is...
And CITA permits arresting police officers to perform, without a warrant, search of an arrested person's physical area. With respect to material constitution, it is natural to treat a cell phone as just another part of the arrested person's physical area, the area within the person's control, as on par, for the relevance of CITA, with pens, keys, and other similar items.
So CITA allowed the phone to be taken?
Because the phone was seen as property, but believing in extended cognition in some degree questions CITA, as it doesn't talk about a brain scan or a forced lie detection test, as a phone can be treated as part of cognition.
True. I wouldn't really like having a lie detection test forced on me if I was stopped by the police.
John Roberts, a member of the court in the case, argued that cell phones should be treated very differently in the context of such warrantless searches. I quote, "Modern cell phones are now such a pervasive and insistent part of daily life that the proverbial visitor from Mars might conclude that they were an important feature of human anatomy." This is essentially an argument for extended cognition.
Wow.
Riley versus California was a landmark United States Supreme Court case in which the court unanimously held that the warrantless search and seizure of digital contents of a cell phone during an arrest is unconstitutional, meaning phones are not just property.
That makes things complicated.
Neil Harbison is a different case, a British artist and cyborg artist who was born with achromatopsia, a condition which left him able to see only monochromatically, complete colorblindness. Despite being born with this condition, colors are no longer imperceivable to him. His eyeborg device osseointegrated inside his skull, specifically his occipital bone, converts for Neil visible colours into sound waves.
So he uses the device to see colours.
Yep. And at a demonstration, the secret police broke the eyeborg, which could have damaged the eyeborg's auditory colour spectrum ability, as the device is part of the person that could be assault in the eyes of extended assault. This is supported by the courts allowing the device in a passport photo for identification.
Wait, the courts allowed him to have a passport photo with the device on his head, but we can't have, hats on our heads or glasses?
Yes. Extended cognition and extended assault have ethical and legal considerations as technology advances and some of these devices become more common.
This won't impact me on a daily basis, though.
Well, even during relatively low-demanding tasks, we offload information processing onto the environment to reduce work for our brains. Human thought and behaviour need not always be produced by the brain alone. It often involves a two-way interaction between the brain, body, and the world.
Yeah.
So can parents take away devices from children, and if so, when and how? When you look over someone's shoulder without permission and read their text or information, is there a case to be made if the information is used in a damaging way? In a similar sense, if someone takes your phone or takes the internet away, is there a case to be made for extended assault? Then, from a less legal or ethical perspective, is extended cognition useful? And if it is, when and how should we use it?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, so I'll see you in the comment section.